The earth moaned under the weight of the machines. Deep in the Chachapoyas highlands of Peru, a multinational geological survey team had been tasked with preparing the area for a hydroelectric project. What was supposed to be a routine excavation had turned into something else entirely. For weeks, the earth had yielded little more than clay, stone, and ancient tree roots. Then came the thud, a reverberation so distinct and unnatural that it stopped the backhoe mid-swing. The operator, a thick-shouldered man named Carlos Mendez, jumped from his seat, heart hammering, ears still ringing from the sound. It hadn't been the dull resistance of stone or the brittle crack of buried timber. This had been a hollow resonance, metallic and deliberate. By the time the rest of the team gathered, the site had taken on an unnatural stillness. A silence hung in the air as if the jungle itself were holding its breath. The senior archaeologist on the team, Dr. Lena Voss, knelt at the edge of the dig site, her eyes tracing the lines that had just begun to emerge from the soil. She brushed away dirt with the reverence of someone touching the bones of a saint. But these weren't bones. Beneath the red earth, a surface of bronze-like alloy reflected the dying sun in hard, geometric patterns. Lena had spent her life studying Incan ruins, tracing the migratory patterns of pre-Columbian cultures. She knew the difference between human craftsmanship and something else, something calculated far beyond the tools or intentions of ancient hands. Her gloved fingers paused on a scene that looked too perfect to be accidental. At her signal, the team began to clear the surrounding soil carefully. As the hours wore on, a structure emerged, an object unlike anything the team had ever encountered. It wasn't just buried, it had been entombed. News of the discovery traveled up the chain quickly, far quicker than Lena anticipated. Within a day, the excavation site was surrounded by military personnel who said very little and watched everything. The Peruvian government, previously disinterested in the minor infrastructure project, suddenly dispatched representatives who arrived by helicopter with polished boots and even more polished intentions. One of them was a man named Colonel Adrian Soria, his crisp uniform bearing no insignia, his presence like that a shadow with rank. "You're certain it wasn't part of some ancient tomb?" Soria asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Lena didn't look up from her notes. Tombs are made from alloys that don't oxidize. This isn't bronze. It's not any known metal. It's something else. Soria studied her for a moment. Then don't call it a tomb. Lena closed her notebook. What would you have us call it? There was a pause before Soria answered, his voice lowering. Classified. More scientists were brought in under the cover of night. They weren't archaeologists. They wore radiation meters and spoke in acronyms. One of them, a pale, sharp-eyed physicist named Dr. Julian Crane, seemed particularly transfixed by the object. Unlike Lena, Julian didn't ask what it meant in historical terms. He asked what it could do. "The shape's aerodynamic," he said one evening, running his fingers along a groove that cut across the surface with surgical precision. "If this were designed for flight, it wasn't in any atmosphere we've studied. There's no thrust vent, no intake, no cockpit. Just form without familiarity." "You think it flew?" Lena asked. "I think it did something we don't have a word for yet." Each day, more of the object was uncovered. It was roughly 30 meters long, its hull smooth and unbroken except for occasional protrusions, lenses perhaps, or sensors. It tapered to a triangular point at both ends, like a vessel designed for motion but currently frozen in stillness. And then there were the markings, etched symbols that danced between art and code. Lena traced them in her sketch pad each night, trying to connect them to any known language. None of them matched the iconography of any known civilization. Not Incan, not Mayan, not even pre-dynastic Egyptian. Then came the night the power failed. The lights around the dig site flickered and went out without warning. Generators stuttered, equipment died, and radios screamed with static. For 6 full minutes, the darkness was absolute, the kind that didn't merely obscure vision but erased orientation entirely. When the lights returned, something had changed. The object had moved. Not far, no more than half a meter, but the soil around its base had shifted, compressed as if something underneath had stirred. Panic rippled through the crew. The military sealed the perimeter. Lena stared at the indentation, her mind racing with impossible explanations. Earth tremor? Unlikely. It had moved upward. Nothing mechanical should be functioning, Julian said, eyes wide behind his glasses. There's no power source. Nothing should respond. But it did, Lena said. It's not dead. The object remained still after that, as if its single moment of defiance had been a warning. But the fear didn't leave. It grew, metastasized into the team like an infection. 2 workers quit the next day. Another refused to sleep on site. Even the soldiers grew quieter, more rigid. Rumors began. Strange dreams, voices heard in the night. Electronic devices behaving erratically. Lena didn't believe in curses, but she believed in psychological stress. Yet deep down, something within her refused to dismiss the possibility that they were standing above something far older and far less human than they could understand. Julian stopped eating. His eyes grew sunken, voice hollow. Lena found him one morning muttering over a new series of sketches he made, lines that mimicked the object symbols but somehow flowed into coherent patterns. When she asked what they were, he looked up slowly and whispered, "Instructions." "For what?" she asked. He only stared back, unblinking. "For waking it up." By then, Lena knew the project was spiraling beyond control. This was no longer a question of historical significance or scientific curiosity. The object was drawing them in, reshaping their thinking, infecting their reason. She began writing a report for academic release, hoping to document everything while she still had clarity. But before she could send it, her satellite phone went dead, along with every piece of unsecured equipment they owned. That night, the jungle felt utterly silent. No frogs, no insects, no wind. Just the object, humming softly beneath the soil. Alive, aware, and, Lena feared, waiting. When the first drone disappeared mid-flight, the team barely reacted. They were already too far gone, gripped by something larger than any of them. But Lena saw the pattern. The object's behavior was changing. It wasn't reacting, it was anticipating. And somewhere deep beneath their feet, it was preparing. The next morning, Colonel Soria made an announcement. The site is now under full military control. All civilian personnel will be evacuated within 48 hours. But Lena knew that by then it might be too late. Whatever lay beneath the earth wasn't buried by accident. It had been hidden, sealed away, and now someone had knocked. The command tent buzzed with tension, filled with hushed conversations and the constant drone of equipment too advanced for any ordinary excavation. Military-grade sensors lined the perimeter, mapping the object's dimensions and behavior. Inside the tent, Dr. Julian Crane stood before a 3D schematic projected on a translucent screen, his fingertips leaving streaks of sweat on the plastic as he traced a new contour that hadn't existed just a day before. "It's changing," he muttered. Colonel Soria didn't move from where he stood, arms folded, eyes narrowed, elaborate. Julian didn't look at him. This extrusion wasn't here when we scanned it on Monday. Now it's present, fully formed. The surface is regenerating. Or adapting. Dr. Lena Voss watched from the back of the tent, silent, arms crossed tightly. She had begun to feel like a visitor in her own dig, relegated to an observer as the operation shifted from archaeological to something far less grounded in science. She knew this wasn't a simple artifact. But she also knew the moment military strategy entered the conversation, truth became a casualty. "I want a new analysis run every hour," Soria said, gesturing to his team of black-clad technicians. "We need to know if it's building pressure or generating energy. We've seen what these things can do when they activate." Julian looked up sharply. "What do you mean, these things?" Soria didn't blink. "Focus on your scans." Lena caught the slip. It wasn't just something buried in the earth. It was something familiar to them, or at least to someone. She waited until the tent emptied before stepping closer to Julian. "What else have they told you?" Julian wiped his forehead, eyes bloodshot. "They haven't told me anything." But they didn't react with surprise. They reacted like they'd been preparing for this. She studied him closely. Julian was unraveling. His pupils twitched, his hands trembled, and his speech had become faster, more erratic. He hadn't slept much, and when he did, he muttered in a strange cadence, repeating patterns that mimicked the symbols carved into the object's hull. She feared he was slipping into obsession, or something worse. That night, she visited the object alone. The moonlight filtered down to the excavation trench, washing the site in pale silver. The object sat there in silence, but something in the air had changed, like static before a lightning strike. She knelt beside it, brushing her fingers over the cool metal. The grooves beneath her fingertips hummed faintly, the vibration steady like a pulse. "Why are you here?" she whispered. The metal warmed under her touch, not in temperature, but in sensation, a crawling awareness that left her breathless. She yanked her hand back, heart pounding, stumbling away until she reached the edge of the trench. Something inside the object had noticed her. The following morning, the ground cracked. A rupture split the soil near the aft in the craft, revealing a chamber beneath the main body. Panic erupted. Soldiers scrambled, scientists shouted, but the chamber didn't open like a door. It unfolded. Petals of reinforced alloy spread outward, revealing an inner compartment bathed in bluish light, its source undetectable. Floating at the center was a sphere, black and impossibly smooth, spinning without sound or support. Soria sealed the site instantly. No cameras, no data transmission, only direct observation. Lena protested, but was ignored. Julian, however, was allowed inside. He approached the sphere with reverence, eyes wide as if glimpsing God. "It's a core," he breathed, "a containment system, or a processor." Soria watched from a platform above, unmoved. "Can it be removed?" Julian hesitated. "It's not attached, but it isn't loose either. It's choosing to stay." Lena, pressed against a glass partition, saw the shift in Julian's face. A moment of terror flickered there, quick, buried, but real. He knew something he wasn't saying. "What is it telling you?" she mouthed through the glass. Julian didn't answer. He turned back to the sphere, transfixed. Over the next 48 hours, the sphere began to pulse. Not visually, but acoustically. It emitted low, subsonic vibrations at irregular intervals. Several personnel complained of headaches, dizziness, vivid dreams. One soldier experienced a seizure. The object was doing something, or becoming something, and all the while, Julian grew more distant. He stopped speaking to Lena. He barely acknowledged Soria. He spent every waking moment in the chamber, muttering, recording, drawing. Lena broke into his tent on the third night. What she found chilled her. Stacks of diagrams filled the space. Sketches of impossible machines, equations that didn't adhere to known physics, and glyphs translated into mathematical expressions. One notebook contained a single phrase repeated over and over. "It remembers." She fled the tent and went straight to Soria. "He's trying to communicate with it," she said. "He thinks it's sentient." Soria was calm, too calm. "We've suspected as much." "You knew," she said, stepping closer. "That's why you're here. This wasn't an accident. This was a retrieval." He regarded her coolly. "You're thinking like a scientist. This isn't about knowledge. It's about containment. What happens if it doesn't want to be contained?" He didn't answer. The next morning, Julian disappeared. The chamber was sealed, the object untouched, but Julian was gone. No signs of struggle. No footprints. His badge lay on the floor near the sphere, and the sensors logged a temperature spike at 3:47 a.m., and then silence. Lena stood at the edge of the open compartment, staring into the impossible geometry within. The sphere was still there, still spinning, but now it emitted a faint glow, like embers within obsidian. Soria issued a new directive: prepare the object for lockdown. Any further analysis would be conducted off-site, under stricter security. Lena refused. "You don't get it," she said. "It's not just dangerous. It's aware, and now it knows we're afraid." Soria didn't blink. "That's why we're moving it." "You think you can control this?" "No. I think we can minimize damage." The tension reached a breaking point when a second rupture occurred, this time not in the earth, but in the object itself. A seam along its top split open, and for the first time, something emerged, a long, filamentous tendril, glistening with a liquid sheen, tipped with what looked like a cluster of crystalline nodules. It didn't move with aggression. It hovered, scanned, observed. The soldiers aimed weapons. Lena screamed for them to stop. But it was too late. Gunfire tore through the chamber. The tendril twitched once and vanished. The room went black. Systems failed. Every device died simultaneously. When the lights returned, the chamber was empty. The tendril was gone. The sphere had dimmed. And Julian's badge was gone, too. Now the object slept again, still and silent. But the damage was done. Something had been awakened. Something had responded. That night, Lena recorded a message. To whoever finds this, we thought we were unearthing history. But we were digging up a decision. One made long before we existed. This isn't technology. It's memory. And now that memory has been disturbed. Outside her tent, the object pulsed again. Just once. But she felt it in her bones. Something had changed. Rain fell hard and relentless, turning the excavation trench into a basin of red, silty water. Thunder growled in the distance, low and constant, like a warning that had finally grown tired of being ignored. The object, no longer just a buried anomaly, no longer just metal, remained unmoved at the center of the site, half swallowed by mud, its surface slick with rain, and faintly glowing at the seams. It pulsed like a heart not entirely mechanical, not entirely alive. Dr. Lena Voss stood beneath the makeshift awning outside the command tent, soaked despite the canvas. She hadn't slept, not truly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Julian's expression from that final day, rapture and terror intertwined. She saw the filament, floating like a question without an answer, and she heard the pulse. Always a pulse. It wasn't sound so much a sensation, like a word whispered in a dream and forgotten on waking. But its meaning lingered. Inside the tent, Colonel Soria was on a satellite call. Lena could hear only fragments. Extraction team en route, secure containment protocols, no civilian oversight. She didn't need the rest. Whatever decision had been made, it wasn't going to consider what was left of the science. They were done studying it. Now, they were preparing to lock it away. Soria stepped out when the call ended, his eyes scanning the horizon. Evacuation begins at dawn, he said without preamble. Civilians and non-essential personnel first. We'll seal the site and transport the artifact in sections. Lena blinked. You're cutting it apart? He didn't answer directly. It's safer that way. No, it's not safer. You saw what it did when provoked. You know this isn't some inert wreckage. It's intelligent. It may even be aware of us, of our intentions. Soria's jaw tightened. Then better to dismantle it before it decides not to let us. Lena stepped forward, rain running from her jacket sleeves. You're treating this like it's hostile. We've already lost a man. You lost Julian because you refused to stop and ask why it's reacting this way. He looked at her then, not coldly, not cruelly, but with the distant resignation of a man who had spent too long in rooms where silence costs less than the truth. Some things don't need reasons. Some things just need to be buried again. She opened her mouth to argue, but the ground beneath them shifted. A tremor, not violent but unmistakable, rolled through the site. The excavation lights flickered. Mud slid in sheets down the trench walls. From within the object, a soft vibration began once more, like a living exhale. Then came the sound, a low, harmonic tone, resonant and structured, like a note struck on a vast alien instrument. The object was communicating again. Inside the command tent, sensors lit up, equipment reactivated. Readings spiked. Lena shoved past two engineers and stared at the data screen. It's broadcasting, she murmured. To what? Someone asked. Lena didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on a waveform, a rhythm with patterns that defied randomness. It was a language, or perhaps a signal not meant for them at all. Far above, the storm broke with sudden violence. A bolt of lightning cracked the sky and struck the jungle canopy beyond the perimeter. The impact triggered a secondary tremor, this one sharper, more focused. Alarms blared. The chamber began to open again. Soria yelled for the perimeter team to fall back. Soldiers scrambled to form a new cordon. Lena didn't move. She stepped toward the trench's edge, eyes locked on the opening as the petals of alloy once again pulled back. The sphere was gone. In its place stood a void, black, shimmering and impossibly deep. Not a physical space. A distortion. A doorway. Then something stepped out. It wasn't a creature, in the traditional sense. It was humanoid in shape, but composed of layered light and moving geometry, like a walking structure of thought and memory. Its surface shimmered with fragments of glyphs, symbols flickering and rearranging as it moved. Weapons rose. Soria gave the order to hold fire. The figure took no aggressive stance. It simply stood, observing. Lena felt it before she saw it clearly, the same sensation as when she had touched the object, an intelligence, vast, old, and curious. The figure turned its head toward her. She stepped forward without realizing it, the rain forgotten, the shouting behind her drowned in silence. She met its gaze, though it had no eyes. The presence entered her mind without force. It offered itself, images, emotions, impressions, a flash of a world burning, not Earth, but somewhere older, a ship like theirs, many ships, leaving an urgency, a memory of imprisonment, of being buried, not for protection, but because they were afraid of what it knew, afraid of what it was. Lena gasped, knees weakening. It had not come here by accident. Why now? She asked aloud, not knowing if she was speaking to it or herself. Why wake now? The figure didn't answer in words. Instead, it projected something into her mind, Julian's last thoughts, frozen in his final moments. Not fear, not pain, understanding. He had seen what lay beneath the surface of the universe, a structure not meant to be uncovered, a message not meant to be read. And he had accepted it. The being stepped closer. Soria raised a sidearm. Step back now, Doctor. Lena didn't move. The being raised a hand, not in threat, but in peace. A wave of pressure rippled out, a concussive force that knocked back everyone except her. Alarms shorted. Drones crashed. The hum of the trench faded to silence once more. Then the being turned and stepped back into the chamber. The petals closed. The object sealed. All lights died. When power returned, the chamber was empty again. The sensors registered no anomaly. The object had resumed its dormant state. Lena stood alone at the edge of the trench, soaked and shaking. She turned to Soria. His gun was lowered. His face was pale. "We can't move it," she said quietly. He nodded, but said nothing. The next day, the military issued a total blackout. The site was evacuated. No records, no reports, no traces left behind. It was sealed and disguised under tons of soil and artificial terrain. But Lena knew it wasn't over. Back in her hotel room in Lima, she sat by the window and watched the skyline flicker as another storm rolled in. She opened her notebook, not the one with her archaeological notes, but the one Julian had filled with glyphs and patterns. In the center was a new symbol. She hadn't written it. It was the same one that had hovered above the figure's chest. A message, or a signature. She wasn't sure which terrified her more. The city lights of Geneva sparkled below like scattered constellations, dim behind panes of reinforced glass. High above the skyline, in a private research suite nestled within the World Scientific Observatory, Lena Voss stared into a digital rendering of the object. It had taken weeks of fighting bureaucracy, military silence, and the overwhelming urge to forget, but she hadn't let go. Couldn't. The rendering rotated slowly on the screen. Every groove, every seam replicated in exact detail from the stolen scans she'd smuggled out in Julian's corrupted backup drive. The figure hadn't returned. The object remained dormant in the Peruvian jungle, its trench filled, sealed beneath layers of concrete and falsified geological data. The world had moved on, but Lena hadn't. She played the recording again, the harmonic signal that had preceded the emergence. Her team of independent analysts, a blend of linguists, mathematicians, and systems theorists, had determined two things. It wasn't a language, and it wasn't a broadcast. "It's a handshake," whispered Omar Patel, a neural systems expert who had once worked with the European Space Agency. He tapped at the display, like a biometric query. An introduction. It was asking if we could understand. Lena didn't look up. We didn't. He hesitated. Julian might have. She nodded. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What happens when it tries again? Omar's face tensed. You think it will? Lena tapped the screen. It wasn't the only one. The structure it emerged from, it wasn't designed for travel. It was designed for storage. Or containment. Something buried it to keep it still. And whatever was trying to reach it wasn't us. A cold wind brushed the windows. Omar crossed the room, pulling down the blinds. Then what now? She hesitated, staring at a symbol etched into the side of the object, the one that had appeared in her notebook. She hadn't drawn it, but there it was, always the same shape. She'd seen it again recently, on an anomalous burst transmission intercepted from a deep-sea sonar array in the Pacific. The signal had lasted less than 3 seconds, but the pattern was identical. They're waking up, she said softly, not just the one in Peru. There are others, some buried deeper, some underwater, some not on this planet. Omar swallowed. How do you know that? Because something sent me this. She slid a drive across the table. He plugged it into the terminal. The screen went dark for a second. Then a series of star charts appeared, overlaid with gravitational data and anomaly logs. A single system blinked red. Not local, not charted. Coordinates matched no known stellar body. It's outside our mapped galaxy, Omar murmured. No, Lena corrected. It's inside, just hidden. Before he could reply, the lights flickered. Just once, barely noticeable, but it was enough. Omar turned toward the door, unease crawling across his face. You said the system is air-gapped. It is, Lena answered. Why? Because I think something just pinged back. A soft chime echoed from the console. A new window had opened, unsummoned, unauthorized. On the screen, a string of symbols scrolled slowly, deliberately, translating into mathematical syntax, then into text. We remember. Lena stepped forward, heart pounding. The screen changed again. We recognize the curious. The curious become the chosen. What does that mean? Omar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The final message appeared. Prepare. Then the console went dark. In the silence that followed, Lena heard the pulse again. Not from the screen. From somewhere deeper. She pressed her hand to her chest. It was within her. The next morning, Lena boarded a flight to Tokyo, where a research anomaly had been logged off the coast. Seismic pulses in deep ocean trenches mimicking the same harmonic signature from Peru. The Japanese Maritime Agency had dismissed it as tectonic stress. But Lena knew better. In the aisle seat beside her sat a man in a charcoal gray suit, reading nothing, watching no screen. When Lena met his eyes, he nodded politely. You're Dr. Voss. It wasn't a question. She hesitated. Who are you? We've met, he said, turning slightly toward her, though not in the usual way. Her stomach dropped. You were at the trench. He smiled faintly. Not exactly, but I was connected. She narrowed her eyes. Julian? The smile deepened. He's part of it now. Not lost. Translated. Her fingers gripped the seat rest. Why reveal yourself now? Because you asked the right question, he said. You stopped digging for answers and started listening for meaning. The cabin dimmed as the plane climbed through clouds. The man reached into his coat and removed a thin, metallic disc no larger than a coin. He placed it gently on her tray table. It's an interface. Old, passive, but it will allow you to hear more clearly. Lena stared at it. You're not human anymore. No, he said, no pride or regret in the word. But I remember being one. She reached for the disc and paused. What happens if I use it? His eyes were steady. You won't be alone. Ever again. He stood then, moving past her toward the back of the cabin. She turned to follow him, but when she looked again, the aisle was empty. Flight attendants walked calmly. Passengers slept or typed on laptops. No one else had noticed him. She held the disc in her palm. It was warm, faintly pulsing, just like the object, just like her. Outside the window, The clouds parted, revealing a vast stretch of ocean below. Somewhere beneath that water, something waited, listening, watching, remembering. She closed her eyes. She didn't feel afraid anymore. She felt chosen.